This is Dr. Flight. I hope you're doing great today. We have a video and some content to talk about supply chains and channels. This conversation and this lecture will kind of walk through some concepts that deal with something in marketing we don't really focus on as often, but are entirely very important. The relationship firms have with each other form a system or a network. And that system or network is used to bring value to the customer, create a chain of events, if you will, that brings a product from raw material stage to something they actually see and feel and purchase on a shelf in a retail store. So while the end goal here is to bring a product to market that the customer will like and they'll want to buy and purchase, how that happens actually is as a result of a bunch of interfirm relationships that need to take place in order to get all the jobs done and all the value infused in the product that the customer ultimately purchases. So there's two different ways we'll look at this. One is, or two different ways people consider, kind of think about this. One would be from a supply perspective where products are made and then brought to market. This is a pretty typical view for an operations-minded perspective, I guess, in terms of how products are brought to market. Another view, though, is that the market creates the product as a result of a need that's there. So in other words, there's a need that's in the marketplace, which then triggers the development of products, the creation of products, the operations, and the operations and the creation of the product don't start from the producer, but instead start from the consumer. So you can think of kind of like two philosophies. One is values generated at the start of the process with raw materials and operations, or value is started and created actually with the consumer. When the consumer has a unmet need or want, they look for a solution, and that prompts the process of value creation. So we'll actually look at this a couple times. We look at like how we view up and down a supply chain and some things like that. At the end of the day, though, when we look at kind of, again, what needs to be done to bring a product to market, there are all kinds of different activities. And those could include, again, identifying the raw materials that are needed, research and development, fabrication, market research, shipping, packaging, and all these things that you see kind of on this journey from one state to the left side of the screen to the other finished state at the right side of the screen. And when we do this, we think of like all the different activities, but none of these activities are done by one company. They're all done by lots and lots and lots of different organizations that have to work together in a system. And so there's a line of research and just kind of this, again, philosophical point of view that along the way, value is being created. Every time somebody does something to the product, another piece of value is added, which the customer would like to have. And as a litmus test, what I like to think of is if you take any of the items that are on the screen, from packaging to shipping to retail to advertising to fabrication, any of the things that are on there, if you took any of those out, could you still bring a product to market? And that's the question. Like, all these activities have to be done. And ultimately, when the customer sees the value on the shelf, they pay for it. So that's kind of the start of this. And we'll come back, talk about market value chains in just a second. Just for clarity, though, a marketing channel consists of independent firms or organizations that have joined together, they've partnered together to bring a product to market. So when we talk about channels, we're often talking about a delivery mechanism or a path to the customer. How does the product get to the customer? What different ways can it get to the customer? That's what a channel really focuses on, that concept. We'll also use the term supply chain. And when you're kind of moving along here in the supply chain and we're talking about different points of bringing value to the customer, if it's heading towards the customer, it's usually called a channel. So if we're talking about downstream movement of product, we're moving the product through a channel to the customer. If we talk about products that are coming to us from upstream in the system or ahead of us, then we would call that a supply chain. So if I'm, for instance, a manufacturer, my supply chain would include my raw materials providers. If I was a retailer, my supply chain might include a distributor, it might include a wholesaler, it might include the manufacturer, might include the raw material supplier. So it's everybody ahead of me or before me in the process. So think upstream, think downstream. When we talk channels, we're typically talking downstream, and upstream would be suppliers and supply chain types of concepts. All of these, though, are produced and composed of intermediaries or folks who lie somewhere between the start and the finish of the product process or the channel that's there. So we'll use those terms a bit, and we'll talk about those as we move forward. Getting back to this idea of value, though, Michael Porter is who was a management philosopher, professor, had many different models that are used today. This one, Michael Porter's value chain, is one that's you'll see many times in management literature, where we'll talk about all the different activities, again, that have to happen in order for a product to come to market. And I show this as just an illustration of how this concept of value being created over multiple stages is really something that cuts across multiple disciplines, not just in marketing, but in others as well. And the takeaway of this, and you could do some research if you wanted to learn more about this model and look at all the 5 different primary stages and 4 different secondary stages. But all these activities that are done along the way produce some type of value which yields a profit. And this is kind of one of the takeaways, that as the work is done on the product, the customer's price changes and fluctuates depending on the value that's created. And the customer ultimately sees that and pays for the value that they see on the shelf through the price that's charged. And in that there is profit margin. Here's another way to kind of think about this. If you look at this sort of model from left to right, I know there's a lot going on here, but we have raw material producers, and they have a certain amount dollar-wise that they require for their raw materials and any work that they do to those raw materials. Those would be basic inputs. Typically, raw materials are fabricated to some degree before they go to the producer. The producer receives them, and then they transform them a little bit more into some type of product. In this case, this is a siding, like a building material for a house, a siding material that you would use in construction. And so this is measured by linear feet or square footage, I guess, but it would actually probably be foot lengths is what we might also call it. And so 5 cents worth of raw materials gets worked on, and in order to do that work to produce the product, the producer requires 50 cents. So right now, in order just to simply, if you were just going to buy the product straight from the producer, the cost incurred up to this point would be 55 cents. Now, a little bit more work is done or values created in getting it to the customer, getting it distributed, put it in retail spaces, doing some advertising, and all those other things that happen. So wholesalers who the product passes through charge 60 cents a square foot. So now we take that 55 and add 60 to it to get another layer of cost as a result of this work that's being done, which then goes to the building material retailers. Retailers sell it to contractors. Contractors then apply the product at the homeowner. The homeowner ultimately would pay or could pay $3.55 a square foot if you add up all of these different pieces. So they're willing to pay $3.55. We can go backwards though too and arrive at this as well. So there's a couple different ways to do this. One, we started from the left and went to the right, but what if we went from the right to the left and we said, look, the customer's willing to spend $3.55, but all these other components require something up front. So we're going to ultimately charge what's there, or what we need to in order to get to that price. What if the customer was willing to spend, I don't know, $3.75 a square foot? Then somebody along the line could actually make some extra money for selling the product, for doing that. Maybe it'd be the retailer. And the retailer might be able to sell the product for a little bit more to the contractor. The contractor would pass that cost to the homeowner, and the homeowner would pay it, and the retailer might get that extra revenue, that customer surplus. Okay, so kind of think about like who establishes this price. It could be cost-based if we move left to right, but it could be demand-based if we look first at the homeowner in this case and ask what they are willing to pay. So this illustration, though, shows that you can go left to right when you think about value being created, but also it illustrates all the different intermediaries that might be involved in bringing the product to the market, which is kind of what we're thinking about. Okay, so key point here that we want to focus on is that in a system, a supply chain or a value chain system of organizations, they're called intermediaries or supply chain members, and they exist to create value to the end user. And that's the only reason why they're there. If somebody in the supply chain doesn't do a very good job, or they could be replaced by another company that does a better job, or if one of the existing supply chain members can replace them and cut them out altogether, then that would make sense. So if a wholesaler, for instance, can do retailing, then the retailer might not be needed, and the retailer might be kicked out of the process because the wholesaler can now do that job, and they might sell directly to contractors who then apply the product to the homeowner's house. So in that case, just think about the shortening of the supply chain by taking out a member who doesn't really need to be there. Okay, so by default or by definition, everyone in a supply chain needs to be there. If somebody else could do the job better, then they would, and the supply chain would shorten. This is actually something called disintermediation. When this happens, it means simply a shortening of the supply chain or the channel. And the jobs and function of the retailer in that case who leaves will be subsumed by other members of the supply chain. And so that's a kind of a key point or idea that these systems of organizations, these networks of organizations are efficient, and they're designed to be efficient in order to allow each supply chain member to do their specialization, make money doing it, but also bring to the customer value at a price they're willing to pay. If the customer's not willing to pay the price, then the system doesn't work. If the customer doesn't like the value they're receiving, then the system doesn't work and it gets corrected. So it's kind of like a natural process that happens, but it's incredibly fascinating because you're dealing with interfirm relationships that are going to make it function. Okay, so how do channel members add value? There are a lot of different ways that we're going to think about in terms of how value is created in the marketplace for companies. One way is to create assortments, groups of products, and again, intermediaries kind of organize, I guess you could say, the marketplace, and they make sense of the marketplace through distribution. Product assortments is this idea where you like can go into a retail store and you can buy all different product categories. You can buy an assortment of products all at one place. And so that's one thing that they do. But they also, again, create this efficiency, which is essential. And kind of we describe this by filling or bridging the gap in time and place, and also possession utility. So, we talked about this idea of getting the product to the customer when they want it and where they want it, as a utility, benefiting feature earlier in the term. And this is exactly one of the things that channel members do, and one of the purposes of the value chain, right? Right. So, adding time, place, utility, providing logistics for physical distribution and functions, and also creating efficiencies in terms of the number of transactions that are needed. Two concepts here. I've already mentioned this idea of creating assortments. Another efficiency creating element is the idea of something called breaking bulk. When an intermediary is interjected, they're willing to take more volume of product, and then they're willing to sell less volume of product. So, for instance, let's say you're a homeowner and you want to buy light bulbs. You don't need lots of light bulbs, but you need a package of like 4, which is fine, right? So you can go to the store and you can buy a package of 4 light bulbs. The problem is the producer of those light bulbs, they don't want to sell 4 light bulbs at a time. They want to sell thousands of light bulbs at a time because that's how many they're producing. So if the manufacturer produces 1,000 light bulbs, they've got to find somebody who will buy 1,000 light bulbs, and the consumer's not going to do it because they don't need that many. So what they do is they find a wholesaler who's willing to buy 1,000 light bulbs, and then the wholesaler breaks up that 1,000 into smaller bundles, and then they send those bundles to retailers. And a retailer, they might have 10 retailers. Each retailer is willing to take 100. And so, okay, retailer A takes 100 of the light bulbs, and then they put them on the shelf, and customers come in and buy 4 at a time. 25 customers come in, they can each buy 4 light bulbs. They sold their 100, and that's how we call breaking. That's what we call breaking bulk. Again, it's an efficiency created through a transaction, and those transaction efficiencies add up. There's actually a theory by Dr. Ronald Coase, the Coase theory of transaction efficiency, and basically the idea is that if we add intermediaries, we can limit the number of transactions that we make, and that's a good thing. Fewer transactions mean less transaction cost, and less transaction costs more profitability. So mainly this idea that there's an internal cost to perform a task or to make a transaction. Also, there are costs like identifying new people to sell to, having salespeople go out and sell to those people, and so on and so forth. Though having a transaction is extremely costly. So looking at an example of this, let's just take this look, and please pause it as you need. Pause the video as needed. This is a transaction cost scenario. Now, don't get also lost too much in the numbers that are here. Some of this is prearranged for, to illustrate some of the examples of these numbers. But the bottom line here is we have at the top 100 manufacturers, and they're all selling their product to retailers. And in this case, there are a lot of retailers. Now, keep in mind that we take the number of retailers times the number of manufacturers. That's how many different transactions could take place. But add to that the idea that you might make transactions multiple times. It's not like you make one transaction and you're done. You make one transaction, the retailer sells out of the product, and then you need to make another transaction. Each time we make a transaction, there will be a cost associated with making that transaction. So again, in this illustration, 100 times the number of retailers. And in this illustration, we say there are 12 transactions per year, once per month probably. We're talking 24 million transactions in this system, right? So that can be costly. Now, again, think if there's can add to this, if there is a cost per transaction, then we're talking lots and lots of money. If there's a $50 cost for transaction, and we're talking billions of dollars that are a result of doing this business directly from manufacturer to retailer. So let's add an intermediary. We put a wholesaler in the middle here, and first and foremost, you're going to notice a whole lot fewer arrows that are being pointed here in terms of transacting with the wholesaler means that manufacturers go to one buyer, and simultaneously the retailers go to that one wholesaler. That one wholesaler now all of a sudden just has to deal with those retailers that are there. Now there are 20,000 of them, but that's all that's there. So number of manufacturers times transactions per year, because there's only one wholesaler now, and number of retailers times number of transactions per year, because again, they're only dealing with one wholesaler. Now the wholesaler is going to have a lot of business, but that's what they do. That's their job. That's their role in the marketplace. But if we kind of think about this, now multiply all that out, because we have the two sets of transactions now. We've got 241,000 basically transactions instead of 24 million transactions per year. So just kind of think, add the intermediary and the total number of transactions that have to take place diminish significantly. Assuming that, again, there's a cost associated with a transaction, we're doing fewer transactions, so that makes sense. Okay, so this is the basis of transaction cost analysis and one of the true benefits of that wholesaler. Okay, we're going to move on here. You're welcome to pause this if you want. Basically, the rest that you see here on the screen incorporates a transaction cost that's associated with each of these deals. Now, again, I'm going to move on. The transaction costs change a little bit at this point because more business is being done between a single manufacturer and the wholesaler. That transaction cost is going to go up. Instead of $50, it's going to be a lot more because it's a bigger deal. As same with the retailer. But at the end of the day, we're spending a lot less money. And what's the driver of that savings is the wholesaler's ability to reduce the number of transactions in the overall industry. Okay, so transaction cost theory by CoWoS helps guide us a little bit in terms of this rationale of adding value and what efficient channels do. Some other things that they do, they add value in other ways. They increase the degree of information between channel members. So customers learn more about the product manufacturers learn more about the customers through intermediaries. Intermediaries also contribute to promotion. They promote products on behalf of the manufacturer in the marketplace. Retailers all the time put out ads to get customers in the store, and they oftentimes feature products that they're selling. They enhance negotiations. We could have, for instance, an agent. An agent is an intermediary. An agent is a middleman or a middle intermediary who brokers deals between buyers and sellers. They handle negotiations between buyers and sellers. We have agents who do that task. Middle intermediaries who work in the middle will finance. So one of the challenges here, or one of the things you want to remember, is that certain intermediaries purchase the product. Other intermediaries have the product pass through. So in other words, a retailer, for instance, purchases the product. They own the product, and then they put it on their shelf. Oftentimes, that's the case. They're buying the product, and then they put it on the shelf. Those interactions and financing and being able to pay for those products has to happen somewhere. The last thing here that I'll talk about, and we'll come back a couple times, is this idea of risk taking. When we talk about risk taking, we're talking about the idea that when a product comes to market, it has a risk of failing. And so who's going to absorb that risk most? Could be the manufacturer, could be the retailer, but chances are, if you're in a well-designed system, you all share the risk of that product's failure, but you also all share the success of that product when it does well. So this kind of shared, goal setting, when this product does well, we all do well. If the product does poorly, we all take a financial risk. So that's kind of our incentive for a success, to make it a success. Regardless of where you are on the supply chain, if the product does well in the marketplace, you succeed. And so it's in your best interest to prop that product up and help it succeed as well. Okay, so there are several different components here that are important to managing, or that are outcomes of managing a supply chain or channel well. One, there are going to be 7 or 8 of these. So number one, a well-managed channel and supply chain creates a lot of availability of the product in the marketplace. So in order for customers to buy the product, we have to have a lot of customers have access to the product. So if 80 or 90% of your customers have access to your product, that's good. They might buy your product. But if only 40 or 50% have access, that's not so good, and your channel's not very efficient. Okay. Better customer satisfaction. So it's been shown in research that better customer satisfaction is a result of strong supply chains. Again, we mentioned this idea of promotions. Strong promotional partners or strong intermediaries will act as promotional partners to promote your product, because again, the more product that sells, the better they do. Transfers of information between the firm and customers increase and are better. So that's a very important element when we go to design new products and learn how to market our products and create a marketing mix. That flow of information is vital for that process. Right? A few more: increased cost effectiveness. So my costs, my bottom line costs, go down as my supply chain and relationships with suppliers goes up. Also, the nimbleness and ability for the firm to adapt. It's called flexibility, and nimbleness in the marketplace is a big thing. So if the market shifts, can my channel and supply chain shift to accommodate the market? If it's able to do that, then we're flexible. Creating competitive advantages. So I can actually gain market share, sales, and lower my costs, gaining market competitive advantages if my channel is superior to that of the channel of my competitors. So think about this from a competitive perspective. You're bringing product to market, they're bringing product to market, but if we can do it better, then that's a competitive advantage. And then finally here on this page, the idea of reduced risk. And again, I've kind of come back to this idea that when we share successes, we also share failures of products through multiple organizations. We all take a little bit of that risk and we share that, which makes it more palatable. It makes it easier for us to handle when the product doesn't do so well. Okay, so these are lots of good reasons to manage actively the supply chain and why supply chains are so incredibly valuable to the marketplace. Okay, as we begin to start wrapping this up, we'll walk through one last concept. And I know there's a lot in this video, kind of talking about a lot of different topics. Introducing this, but also extending this into this idea of, how the channels are formed. Again, when we talk about channels, this image is a great example to show that, we have a market, but not all consumers in the market buy the same way, purchase the same way. We call those market segments. We do the segmenting process specifically to, kind of reach out to with different market mixes and plans to different types of consumers. And so in this case, we have three different types of consumers. There are our large account buyers, we have medium-size account buyers, and then we have small buyers, and they're designated by the amount of money they spend in the product category. So large account buyers spend $10,000, and we don't know if that's per purchase or kind of on an annual basis or whatever, but medium accounts, 3,000, small buyers, 1,000. So think about these as three different market segments and think about each market segment in terms of how they want to be marketed towards or how they want the approach to happen for them to buy a product. And this is an electronic components company. They've got their product line and they've got three different channels in order to design to reach these three different market segments. So think about channel design from a market perspective as a result of segmenting. And, we've got these different market segments and they have different needs. So with the large accounts, you can imagine that they're going to want direct personal attention. They're going to want a salesperson who's devoted to their account, and they want to be able to go directly to the company. So in this case, we have a direct sales force. They're hired and owned. They run out of the main office where the company exists, and they call on their customers. They call on these large accounts. That's how they are served. Next channel uses commissioned sales agents. So these are folks who are not employees of the electronics company. They are agents of the company. They also will sell directly to the customer who is in the medium account size. But the medium account size customers may also buy from distributors too. So in other words, we have a couple different paths here that are happening. The distributors could sell directly to these medium accounts, or the medium account owners could buy from commissioned agents. Now, if that account size grew from 3,000 to 10,000, we would shift them over to a direct sales approach, and we would have an employee of the company serve them directly. But as long as they're small, then this is the path that they're going to take. The last approach is going to be the direct or the indirect approach that uses retailers who buy the product from distributors who buy the product from the component parts company. The small buyers are going to walk into the retail shop. They're going to get whatever service they need from that retailer. And there's going to be a bit of distance, you'll notice, between the small buyer and the actual producer. So again, here's one of these areas where we're relying on a lot of information to be shared between the retailers, the distributors, and the company itself. And that's a vital component. But this is called a channel. This is called channel mapping. This is like a really important concept when we begin to look at how we reach the customer, how we're going to organize and plan our channel approach. Okay, let's dig in. We'll do one last kind of deep dive here in terms of what we think is going to happen and why this matters. At the end of the day, we care about our profitability and channels. And we looked at this earlier, where each channel member adds value, but they also take a little bit of profit, right? And which is fair. That's because they're doing something. A retailer takes profit. When a customer walks in, they spend $1,000, the retailer is earning 20% of that money. They're earning $200, which means only 800 is left to move up to other channel members. The distributor also wants a take. They take 15% of that, so which is $120. So now $320 is left to move forward. Now, there's a cost associated with bringing that product to the distributor who then gets it, and it's 1% of the deal. So $327 is going to be the amount that this channel costs the producer. If somebody buys $1,000 worth of material, $327 will be paid in essence for these other channel members to do their job. Now, what does this cost? Well, it frees me up if I'm that producer to not have to do this, right? They're doing a job that I'm not doing, so I'm paying them to do that basically, or they're being paid to do that. Now, if we move over to the direct channel, where we have in-house salespeople selling directly to large accounts, $10,000 or more, the cost that is going to happen here, we're going to assign a transaction cost. Now, the salesperson needs to go visit the account holder. They need to call them up. They need to go take them out to dinner. They need to produce brochures. They need to do travel expenses and all of that stuff. So in order to serve that customer, it's going to cost $500 for every $10,000 customer. And that's a 5% cost. So customer spends $10,000 with us. The cost of that channel is $500, and the producer sees $9,500 after that is accounted for. Okay, the middle column, kind of similar. We have a similar approach here. The distributor is still there, very much like they were in the direct approach for the small buyer, so we have a 15% cost. But we also had the sales agent, if you remember, and they charged 5%. And there's also a transaction cost just to make the transaction happen. So again, this channel now has its own kind of element that's there. It's a $648 cost for a $3,000 transaction. All right, so as we look at this, we kind of calculate this notion that each channel has different profitabilities associated with it. And you know, the small buyer channel is less profitable than the other channels, but you're doing less work also. You're just bringing the product and everybody else is actually selling in the marketplace. So there's less work involved. Also, think about there are probably lots and lots and lots of small buyers, and the volume of small buyers kind of makes up for the lower profit margin that you have in that particular channel. So this pocket price is how much the producer is putting in their pocket. It's the amount that they bring home after the cost of the channel. Now, the other thing that's kind of labeled here is this idea that each channel produces a different volume of business. That's 40%, 20%, 40%. That's kind of what those figures are. So if 40% of your business comes from the small buyers channel, then that'll account for a certain amount of business. And so we can average these together. It's called a weighted average. It might be the average pocket price or the average channel margin is what we would typically call this. The average channel margin might be how much money we would make as a result of each transaction. Okay, so again, this is kind of this scenario where we're looking at channels, channel design, these intermediaries, how they work with each other to create a channel, and it's vitally important and a big part of marketing. This is relationship marketing, actually. It's what we call this, relationship marketing, and we focus on this very heavily when we look at business to business marketing. Business to business marketing is all about how companies relate to each other, and it plays itself out quite nicely in supply chain and logistics and channels work. So let me know if you have any questions. I know there's been a lot in this video. Hopefully it's been informative, if nothing else. And otherwise, touch base with me if you'd like, and have a great day.